Is that one of the reasons why, stories about, the authoritarianism in India, the fact that there is extremism or fascism in India, is much more palatable to the Western press, newspapers in the United States, voices in the United States? Are you saying that's one of the reasons why intellectuals in India get more traction for their voices to be more heard in the West? Because that's the kind of India that the West wants to see?
No, I don't think Western institutions want to see a negative narrative about India. What they need is an authoritative narrative. Western institutions don't understand India, and so they're looking for authoritative voices.
But why do they use, why do only some kinds of voices, get play in those platforms?
Well, they're using prominent English-speaking intellectuals who have a broad reach overseas, especially people who are involved with United Nations agencies or NGOs abroad, people who are involved with activist organizations, because these people are very engaged in Western debates. They're talking the language of the West in Western forums. Now, I want to emphasize, there's nothing wrong with that. Activists should be activists. That's their role. But they should also be honest. That's also their role. And I see a lot of compromises on that second half.
You talk about this resentment about India's rise, Professor. I want to explore that a little bit. Where does this resentment actually come from? Is it racism? Is it colonialism? Is it Orientalism? Is it a mix of all of these things? What is it? What do you put it down to? Because the people you've been talking about, who you describe as intellectuals, are very much part of that conversation.
We've seen the pattern in country after country, not just in India, that intellectuals want someone to speak for. Whether that's Marxists who want to speak for the workers, whether that's well-meaning activists who want to speak for the poor, whether that's religious reformers who want to speak for downtrodden religions, they want someone they can speak for. Well, if people can speak for themselves, that's a threat to the intellectuals who want to speak for them. A resurgent India, an India that's growing very rapidly, where people have found their own voice, where Indians are very capable and ready to speak for themselves, not just elite Indians, but ordinary Indians, Indians who don't speak English. Indians are more and more confident to give their own point of view, not only to the government, but to the media and to the West. The internet enables that. They can do it on social media. They can do it on blogs. They can get out there in the world. Well, that disintermediates the intellectuals who are keen to have someone to speak for. After all, if all you are is one person as an intellectual, you're not speaking for anyone, what kind of voice do you have? Very little. But if you claim to speak for an entire class of supposedly downtrodden people, that gives you some kind of moral authority. And that's also, I think, very self-indulgent. That is, intellectuals who, instead of wanting to pull back and let people speak for themselves, instead want to put themselves forward as the spokespeople for those downtrodden.
There's a great deal of my word is the last word. There's a great deal of cancel culture. I personally believe that liberalism is a rarity in India, and those who describe themselves as liberals in this country actually really aren't liberals. But speaking about that self-indulgent aspect, and there are many tweets. I'm going to put some of those tweets on our screen. We've got some from prominent persons, Shekhar Gupta and others, which we'll put on our screens for a moment for our viewers to read. But my question to you, Professor, also, while also acknowledging those tweets, and maybe if you want to respond to them, is what does that self-indulgence go down to? Is it about ideology? Does it go, even closer to, a person's personal views about Modi? Because, if you boil it all away, many people believe that all of this boils down to a person's sort of hostility towards Modi and his politics. Is it that simple?
I don't think it's that simple, because I think if Mr. Modi were gone tomorrow and someone else replaced him, it would be the same story. Intellectuals in general are very wary of democracy. My colleagues, I'm a sociologist, my colleagues in political science are always talking about the threat of, quote-unquote, mere electoral democracy or mere majoritarian democracy, as if the electoral voice of the majority were somehow inherently anti-democratic. Now, many intellectuals feel that way because democracy is threatening to intellectuals. I often put the exercise to my own social policy students. Would you rather live in a democratic country or in a country that had the policies you prefer? I would say roughly 2 to 1, elite Western students would rather live in a country where their own preferred policy is implemented than to live in a country that's a democracy. And this is, of course, why China, for example, has been very popular among Western academics, because they admire the Chinese Communist Party's so-called meritocracy, because the Chinese Communist Party puts on a pedestal intellectuals who want to have a direct say in how a country is run without having to worry about convincing people that they're right. A democracy is all about the people. The people are sovereign in a democracy. And sometimes they'll want policies that intellectuals find very unpalatable.